Hi everyone, I am Maynard Bonavente from English 1A, and I'm going to discuss to you the first half of this lesson given by Ma'am Krisa Imana, which is entitled The Self. Okay, for now we're going to talk about the psychology. What does psychology mean? In this lesson, it says that mental processes, which are comprised of our thoughts, cognition, senses, perception, and feelings, emotions. It helps us to understand and make sense of the world and who we are with. So when we say psychology, it is all about the thing within ourselves. It's about the cognition, about our perceptions, about our emotions, and kung paano natin may intindihan at ma-perceive yung mundo na ginagalawin natin at kung sino yung mga taong nakapaligid sa atin. That's psychology. Number 2 is neuroscience perspective. Neuroscience perspective, it is a behavior from perspective of biological functioning. Second bullet, study of heredity and evolution, influence behavior, brain and nervous system. So when you say neuroscience perspective, it is all about the heredity and the evolution. So it deals with the kung namamanay mo yung mga behaviors. So yung mga behaviors na sa genes natin, so namamana po yun. And the evolution, which is the merong growth or may pagbabago, evolution. Second is psychodynamic perspective. Psychodynamic perspective, it is a behavior motivated by inner forces and conflicts, not aware or not on control. For example, we have dreams, slip of the tongue. So when we say psychodynamic perspective, it talks about the psychological things na hindi natin control o wala tayong control. Katulad ng dream, so hindi naman natin kontrolado kung ano yung mga panaginipan natin sa gabi. At yung slip of the tongue, dahil sa conflicts, dahil sa emotions natin, so may mga nasasabi tayong bagay na hindi natin sinasadya. Okay, let's proceed to behavioral perspective. It says that focuses on objective, observable behavior. So when you say behavioral perspective, it is how environmental factors, or which we call the stimuli, it affects observable behavior, which is called the response. So ang behavioral perspective, ito po yung mga observable behavior natin na ang cause po nito yung mga environmental factors. So kaya nagiging ganun, yung mga observable behavior natin is because of the objects or the environmental factors na nasa paligid natin. So, we have cognitive perspective. It focuses on how people think, understand, and know about the world. It influences our behavior. It says that human thinking is equal to computer because, number one, a computer and the human thinking, it takes information. So ibig sabihin, meron tayong mga senses, meron tayong mga perceptions. So we take the messages from the outside of the body papunta sa ating brain. So ganun tayo nagpa-function. Number 2, it transforms. So ibig sabihin, kung ano yung mga thoughts natin, nagkakaroon ng evolutions, nagkakaroon ng pagbabago, nagkakaroon ng growth. Number 3, it stores. So, ibig sabihin, meron tayong memory, meron tayong natandaan, meron tayong natutunan. So, may mga bagay at mga thoughts na and experiences na tumatatak sa atin. Number 4, it retrieves. So, ayun nga, meron tayong kakayahan na may maalala tayong bagay, ganun. Parang katulad din sa stores. It is how people make decisions, patterns, and it regulates in the operation of minds. Okay, this one is the self as a cognitive construct. Two aspects of the self, I and me. So according to William James, there are human thoughts. We have 5 characteristics of human thoughts. So for number 1, all human thoughts owned by some personal thought. So ibig sabihin, yung human thoughts daw natin, hindi tayo pare-parehas. So nagkakaroon tayo ng personal thought. Kaya yun yung nagbibigay ng pagkakaiba sa atin dahil meron tayong personal thought. So, hindi lang siya human thought. So, kapag nasa yun na yung thought na yun, nagkakaroon na yun ng personal sa'yo. So, nagiging iba na yun kapag pagdating sa'yo. Number 2, All thoughts are constantly changing or are never static. So, ayun nga, meron tayong growth. So, yung thought natin, kung ano yung pag-iisip natin before, kung ano yung pinaniniwalaan natin. So, constantly, nag-change talaga yung thoughts natin. Kasi, yun yung kakayahan natin. So, mabago yung mga thoughts natin. Number 3, there is a continuity of thoughts as its focus shifts from one object to one another. So, hindi doon natatapos ang pag-iisip ng tao, yung pag-wonder at yung pagkakaroon natin ng thoughts sa mga bagay-bagay. So, hindi po yun natatapos. Number 4, thoughts deal with objects that are different from and independent of consciousness itself. So, sabi dito, yung thoughts na natin, it deals with the object at naka-independent siya sa consciousness natin. So, kung ano yung mga bagay na nakikita natin, may iba-iba silang thoughts. So, kung ano yung bagay na makikita natin sa ibang bagay, ay hindi thought na makikita natin sa ibang bagay. So, magkakaiba sila. At independent siya sa ating consciousness. Number 5, consciousness can focus on a particular objects and not others. So, yun nga, yung consciousness natin, hindi lang siya, meron siyang ability at kakayahan na mag-focus sa isang bagay at nakakaya natin mag-focus. Yun yung kakayahan natin. And that is the human thoughts. That is the 5 characteristics of human thoughts. Ayan po. Ngayon naman, i-discuss naman natin yung I and me. The I. When we say the I, the one who acts and decide. So for example, I won the game. Number 2, I borrowed her book. So kung sa grammar, titingnan natin yung paggamit ng I, kung paano ginagamit yung I sa sentence. So pag sinabing I, siya yung doer. So I won the game. I borrowed her book. And pagdating naman sa the me, the physical characteristics as well as the psychological capabilities that makes who you are. What you think or feel about yourself as an object. Example, the gift were sent to me. The person is smiling at me. So, kung makikita natin, doon magkakaiba yung paggamit ng I and me. So, ang pinagkaiba lang nila yung kung paano siya gamitin when it comes to sentences. Pangalawa naman, psychologically, pag sinabing I self, it is about pure ego or thinking self. So, ibig sabihin, psychologically, it is the thoughts inside about thinking self, about pure ego, about sa inside natin. And yung the me naman, it is the empirical me. So, para siyang naturalism. So, pag sinabi natin empirical me, it is about the experiences, kung ano yung nakikita natin sa outside of the body, kung ano yung nasa environment natin. Yun yung empirical me. And that's I and me. And then for the 3 components of me self, let me introduce to you Mark Froilan, and he will discuss the half of this lesson. Thank you.
Thank you, Maynard. Now I will discuss to you the 3 components of me self. First is the material self. Consists of the things of objects that belong to the person or entities that the person belongs to. The body is the core of the material self and everything that attach or associated to identifies the person. For example po, the style of our clothing, because the way we are dressed ourselves will define our identity. And another example is family, because family will guide us to our physical appearance, which is the body. Kasi yung body po indicated sa first components of me self that it is the core of the material self. And another example is any tangible objects that the individual possess or a certain persons belong to will defines the material self of that individual. Next is the social self. When the person is in a particular situation, changes in behavior usually result from different social situation the person find himself in. The person chooses the self that would smoothly adapt to the social situation in order to him to fit in. So the social self po is the product of what the situation demands from that individual. It is in order for him to fit in that social situation po. For example, how individual will introduce himself in school, family, or friends. And another example po is pag nasa party ka, you have to socialize with them in order to fit in. And the last is the spiritual self. Self that is more concrete or permanent when compared to a material and social self. Most subjective and intimate part of the self. It includes individual personality, values, and morals that are usually stable and constant. Spiritual self is always engaged in the process of introspection. It refers that spiritual self is more concrete and permanent than to material self and social self. Kasi po, ang spiritual self is innate na po sa isang individual. Unlike po dun sa material self and social self na dynamic. Spiritual self also undergoes in the process of introspection or self-reflecting. Pag sinabi po natin introspection or self-reflecting ay nagre-reflect po tayo kung ano po yung mga nagawa natin sa araw-araw. It's either good or bad, ethical or unethical. For example po, may test po, tapos nag-cheat ka. Tapos yung konsensya nyo po, yung magpaparealize sa'yo na mali yung ginawa mo at hindi ka magkakaroon ng peace of mind dahil po dun sa pag-cheat na ginawa mo. So let's proceed to humanistic perspective. Humanistic perspective is naturally strive to grow, develop, and be in control. So in this, it says that an individual is striving to have a self-growth and development. Next is capacity to seek and reach fulfillment. Every person's with humanistic perspective has the capacity to seek and construct experience that can reach their fulfillment. And in positive perspective, they have optimistic outlook in life po. Yung mga positive na pananaw natin sa buhay. Next is strive to reach full potential if given opportunity. So, they are giving their best, or pag may opportunity darating sa atin, kailangan ibibigay natin yung best natin, parang grab the opportunity kaagad, ganun. So, next is every individual with humanistic perspective po possess free will, own choices, and often seek for their self-fulfillment po. So next is the true self. First bullet has a sense of integrity of connected wholeness, requires a spiritual awakening, and requires healing old wounds. So dito, if meron tayong past sins na nagawa, or yung ibang tao na may kasalanan na nagawa sa atin, we need to forgive them, or we need to forgive ourselves po to achieve the true self. Next is recognizing the emotional response. So, dapat hindi tayo maging in denial, but we need to aware sa feelings and emotions na mararamdaman natin. Next is one can never enter into the true self without letting go. So, connected po siya sa requires healing old wounds, na dapat lahat ng mga problema or mga hindi magagandang bagay na nagawa natin sa past ay kailangan natin i-let go para ma-achieve natin yung true self. Next is false or fake self. First is when the person has to comply with external rules such as being polite or otherwise following social codes, then a false self is used. So it is a type of our fake self po that we need to follow the external rules or the social codes than to our own preferences. Next is the false self constantly seek to participate demands of others in order to maintain the relationship. So yun nga po, we just following the rules just to maintain our relationship to them or to the society. Next is our self blockade that rests on the surface in covering of our emotions and is presented to the world. So most of the time po, we are just presenting our emotions po. We are covering ourselves with emotions. Kaya natatawag po talaga itong false or fake self. Next is agentic self, defined as the aspect of human personality that is determined by future assessment of one goal. So, it says here, ma'am, that a future goal that choose of an individual will define or measure his personality. Next is originators of experience. Human agency is the ability to act and make things happen. So, when the individual chooses a goal, he will act according to the process of how he can achieve it, and that's why the self or the human is called a originators of experience, because when we are achieving our goals, nagkakaroon tayo ng experience that will improve us and make things happen. Next is proactive self. Make things happen instead of waiting for them to happen to you. So proactive individuals look forward in the future instead of waiting someone to told them to do something. They will do it first because they have initiatives. Next is individualism self. Um, First is they put themselves first, so mas priority po nila yung sarili nila. Next is loosely linked to each other, so they prefer to work alone than to work with other people. Next is motivated by their ideas and goals, so they are making their own ideas and they are driven by their own goals. Next, emphasis is put on the self. Next, communicate as individual and pay little attention to person group membership. Decision making is decided upon whether if it's better for the individual, so they are making this decision na alam nila na makakabuti para lang sa nila or para sa individual. Next is individual rights are taken and seen as most important. So para sa kanila, mas mahalaga po yung rights nila kaysa sa iba. And for the last, collectivism self. First, fell closely to one or more groups by living closely linked to themselves. So an individual become more productivity whenever they are with other people. Next, commitment to valued group. So dito po, they are more committed to other people than to themselves. And that is where our report ends with Mr. Maynard. Thank you for listening.